Welcome to The Girlfriend God, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience. If you enjoy this podcast, be sure to subscribe, follow, rate it, review it, and share it with your friends. Now, together, let's find the divine. Welcome to the season premiere of The Girlfriend God Season 4. Today, I'm super excited to welcome Karen Tate, thought leader, speaker, author, and activist. Karen's work is at the crossroads of spirituality, personal transformation, and social justice. She's the host of the long-running Voices of the Sacred Feminine podcast, considered a treasure trove of wisdom for more than a dozen years. A caring economy conversation leader and power of partnership presenter with the Center for Partnership Studies, Karen also earned the certificate from Smith College in the Psychology of Political Activism, Women Changing the World. Karen can be seen in numerous YouTube videos and viewed in the award-winning documentary, Femme, Women Healing the World. Named one of the 13 most influential women in goddess spirituality, and a wisdom keeper of the women's spirituality movement, her body of work over the years, along with reviews of her books from students, peers, and colleagues, speaks to her extensive leadership, knowledge, and expertise. And today, Karen and I talk about her body of work, the importance of sacred sites, the erasure of women's ideas, and how the goddess is having a moment right now. So Karen, welcome to the show. Like I said, I've followed you for years, so it's a real treat for me to even have you on the show.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much. It's an honor for me to be here. And whenever I get an opportunity to talk about goddess, I take it.
Same. And it seems like I have a bit of a theme this season with sacred activism, because I recorded with Marilyn Nyborg, and Dale Allen's going to be on the show this year. And yeah, it just seems like that's a thing that's getting a lot of play right now. But
yeah, we're all in each other's orbits, and
yes,
they've been on my show, and I've been on theirs, and important information. I think we have to get out. Women as leaders, we really need to step up at this time, because it's crucial.
So let's talk about your most recent book. And the title is escaping me, although I knew it 5 minutes ago.
Normalizing abuse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what led to that? I mean, that seems like both like it fits with your goddess spirituality, but also kind of a departure from that, like outside your normal body or your regular body of work, I guess I want to say. So what led to that?
Yeah.
What led to this particular title?
It kind of is and kind of isn't. I think it's when you we're talking about the bio, you said I'm kind of at the crossroads between spirituality, personal transformation, and social justice. That's really what that book, I think, encapsulates, because it's my 7th book. I've written 4 books. I've curated 3 anthologies. The 3 anthologies, I call them Manifesting a New Normal, because they are helping us look for guideposts to create a new world. And then this abuse book, Normalizing Abuse, I actually wrote it when I was recovering from a stun gun assault and taking care of my husband, who had fallen at work and had a brain injury. It was sort of the next step on this path of looking at how important social justice is and how goddess values and ideals play into that. And what I really started to realize was there's so much manufactured consent out there. We are just bombarded every day with things that happen in the world, people who say things, people who inspire hate and divisiveness, and we're becoming numb to it. I think we're in a way normalizing it. Well, he says that all the time, or that's what men do.
Right.
And we don't even react anymore. I almost feel like our language needs a reset. Because just for instance, we hear the word rape. Oh, rape. We don't think about the trauma, the impact, the actual act, if you will. It's just rape. Or income equality. Yeah, that's an economic term, but when you think about it and unpack it, that means a woman is going to retire in poverty.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, I really started to look at all of this at a different level and hoped I could help awaken all of us, myself included, because I realized, even though I was a social justice activist, that I was not seeing the abuse that was going on in my own life. I thought I was fighting for other women. All the while, I had things happening that I was wearing my own blinders.
Right.
And I thought, well, wow, if this can be happening to me, what about the woman who doesn't even know about social justice?
Right. Right. I hear you. I mean, when I was in my late 20s, I was in an incredibly emotionally abusive relationship. And I was a domestic violence counselor. But yet there I was telling my friends, well, it's not physical abuse, and really it's only when she's drunk, and and hearing myself do that. So I can relate to you there.
Thank you. Thank you. Hearing you say that, I feel just a little bit less dumb.
Right.
Because,
Right.
I thought, oh my God, how did I let this happen to me?
Right. Right.
But we rationalize it. We want to
Right.
keep the paycheck. We don't want to make waves. We don't want to be the problem solver. We don't want to have to upset the apple cart. So we endure,
Right.
endure, endure.
I think that and Marilyn and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. I'm a big proponent of educating people on how power hides in plain sight. And when you talk about being desensitized, I feel like that's exactly what has happened. Is it's so normal, no one ever thinks to see it as abnormal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And particularly when there's a lot of power in the media. And I remember reading when I was a domestic violence counselor and I was a rape crisis counselor. One of the people that we read was Jackson Katz, who's an anti-violence educator, and he talks about how the media, just in the language that it uses, and the passive tense or passive language. And the example that he gave was with domestic violence. You'll see a headline that says, Mary was a beaten woman, but you never see the headline that says John beat Mary.
Yeah.
Which is what leads to that kind of victim blaming culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because words, we know as people who follow goddess principles, words are power. You know what I mean? You can't speak unthinkingly about these things. And the other example that I remember is when we talk about school shootings, which are one of those things that we've normalized, right? It's just another school shooting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in his critique of masculinity equals violence, which is, I believe, is what we have in this culture, I think he's right. And these were talks that he gave, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even progressed since then. But he gave the example of school shootings where when you see the headline in the news, it's always, what's happening to our youth and kids killing kids. But that's not actually accurate. It's boys killing other children,
Yeah.
right? It's not kids, it's boys.
And you have politicians who want to say, oh, it's just the problem with our hearts, or people aren't going to church anymore. They want to blame all the wrong culprits, so to speak.
Right.
I mean, they don't
moral
blame the right
ills.
culprits.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not, and it's so pervasive. I mean, I'll reveal something personal here, because of my stun gun assault. It happened to me on the job. And when it happened to me, I was very lucky. I feel like Goddess had put a bubble around me to a certain extent. The girl, it was a young woman who was coming after me with the stun gun. You would never have thought you had to be afraid of her. She just looked like a young college girl. And when she finally made contact with the stun gun didn't activate. So I didn't go into this spasm like you see, and it gave me a second to detach and step away enough so that I could, put a barrier between the two of us. And when I told the person I worked for about it, it was minimized. And because it got minimized, I got this, the silent message, okay, let's not make this a thing. And and I'm sure they're worried about their worker comp rates, not, well, gee, Karen, should you go to the ER or something? Or you okay? Wasn't anything like that. So I dropped it, because I didn't fall on the ground. I didn't hit my head. I didn't think I was physically injured. So I dropped it. I didn't realize in the coming months and years how it affected me psychologically.
Right.
Well, then when I tried to file a worker comp case, they said, oh, too late. It's like when a rape victim finally decides they have the courage to talk about it. Oh, well, that was a million years ago. Why didn't you come forward sooner?
Right.
Things are just so messed up. And it's all for the benefit of the people who benefit the most from this predator capitalism that we live in.
Right. So with the title of your book, Normalizing Abuse, I'd say it's also normalizing trauma, right? And not, as you say, didn't realize at the time that years and months later that it would have this effect on you.
Yeah.
I feel like so I've been reading some lately about how all of our kind of general fucked upness in the world, or at least in the United States, right? That's really all I can speak to because this is where we live. Is really about having never been taught how to regulate our own nervous system, which I think is really interesting concept, right? Because there's something to be said for recognizing dysregulation, right? Like in my own life, so I, like everyone I know, take some sort of an anti-anxiety, antidepressant, whatever. I know very few people who don't take something. But I have often wondered, is that really effective, or is the key to really be as in touch with myself as I am and learn how to regulate my own nervous system? That's really the problem.
Well, and it's putting a Band-Aid on the problem, really.
Right.
Because you look at the opioid epidemic out there, It's
Right.
for a reason. It's, because the pressures that we have to live under. You go to the Scandinavian countries, they don't have the economic pressures that we have
Right.
here. They're starting to experiment with universal basic income now, for instance. And it shows when somebody knows they're going to have a roof over their head and food on the table, it takes the pressure off. Now, I mean, that's just economically. I mean, obviously, there are other sorts of stressors besides not having enough money. Um, but, I feel like, yeah, there hasn't been enough importance put on self-care, whatever
Right.
that looks like. It's more about, going to a psychiatrist or therapy is taboo, especially for men. I mean, look, you even have people in Scientology that think it's evil, right?
Right.
You have fundamentalist churches that tell women to stay with their abusive husband. And
Right.
if they're just a good enough wife, then, maybe this wouldn't be happening. We aren't addressing the sources of our anxiety and
Right.
trauma and exploitation. They're
Right.
just getting away scot-free. Like when you said at the beginning, well, Mary was raped, not John raped her, you know?
Right. Right. So, do you feel like things are changing? I feel like great change is always preceded by great chaos, and it's why we're at where we're at now, because all of these things that we're talking about are beginning to fail. Government is failing, capitalism is failing. These structures that have been in place for so long are starting to fall apart. And you mentioned basic universal income. I think that is on the horizon for us. We'll be the last to do it because we're the last to do everything. But I have a friend who lives and works in Berlin, and she's a painter, she's an artist, but for a long time she worked in tech and she worked in blockchain technology and all that. So she's very aware of what's happening in the world there. And she said, Kelly, in 5 years, 95% of the jobs here will be replaced by AI. And they will have no choice. But the only solution to that is a universal basic income.
Yeah. And then the problem is who's going to decide who's going to get how much? That's where
Right.
the next fight is going to
Right,
be.
right.
Because there are people who, at least here in the United States, who think any sort of assistance is, the welfare queen stereotype that I grew up with in the
Right,
South.
right.
So yeah, but I do think that's where we're headed. And it's just really a shame. And well, you asked me, if I thought things were, if things were changing. I do. But I think because so much is failing, but I'm sort of in this place. I am trying to hold on to the vestiges of what does work, even if it's not perfect,
Right,
while I let go of the stuff that's real crap.
right, right,
And what I worry about is I have so many women friends who have become apolitical, and and they just say, oh, well, one party's as bad as the other. No, 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 no. One party
right,
wants to take away all of our rights, doesn't care if we eat or have a roof over our head. They only care about billionaires and tax cuts, and doesn't care how they rape the earth. You have to draw a distinction, because if all of you apolitical people stay home and don't vote, you know what? We're going to be living in the Handmaid's Tale. And then
right,
what?
right.
Then what? You know, that concerns me. It really does, because one thing I've found in the last decade or so within goddess spirituality is everybody doesn't connect the dots between goddess and values and ideals and politics and how they vote. you know.
Right. Right.
They'll go vote for a Republican and then say they're an environmentalist, you
Right.
know,
Right.
or say they care about abortion and then go vote for Trump,
Right.
you know. So there's a cognitive disconnect, and I don't know how we reach these women, because that's like saying, well, how do you reach the people in QAnon? You know, I mean, I don't
Right.
know how to reach the women who believe in this erasure of women stuff, you know.
Right. Right.
So I just sort of focus on what we have in common.
Right. Because it's pointless to argue with somebody. You're not going to change their minds, right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think all we can do at this stage is kind of educate and just do our own thing and hope that as people like you and I who do have a goddess consciousness, we are aware that we have an influence in the collective consciousness. So I think the more of us come together, the better that is,
I
right?
think so. I
Because
do.
because I also think there's a danger in beating the drum of negativity, because in terms of collective consciousness, that just adds to the already existing problem. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's just me being I mean, I'm a bit of a law of attraction person, and I don't buy into all of it, but I do believe that part, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, if we're all if millions of us are complaining, well, it's not fair that that guy has all the money and I don't have any money. The longer we do it, the louder we complain. That's why that guy continues to get all the money on some
Well,
level, right?
but there's something to be said for channeling that anger and upset into, you know, ways that are going to maybe make a difference. Like,
Right,
for instance, look at how when the Weinstein guy finally was held accountable. Now, you know, he's one guy, right?
right,
But I think it sort of changed the consciousness. Um,
right,
so our, you know, our outward displays of discontent do serve a purpose. However, I agree with you that, you know, what we focus on, I think, grows. You know, we don't want to focus every day on everything's falling apart, nothing's working.
right,
You know, I think we have to be in gratitude and in compassion and in generosity, but at the same time, know what's going on in the world,
right,
so that when it comes time to vote locally or nationally, we know what's going on enough to know, well, one party wants to do away with democracy and another party wants authoritarianism and a theocracy. You know,
right,
we
right,
at least, I think, have to stay tuned in enough when we're called upon to vote, or I don't know, our occasional marches in the street, that we show up and in solidarity. Um, but on an everyday basis, don't let it consume us, I guess. Does that make
right, right.
sense?
It does. It does. I mean, I feel like that's how I am. Like
Yeah.
I, I, I read my, you know, I read my New York Times briefing every morning and a couple other things, just to be aware enough of what's going on in the world so that I don't walk out my front door one day and go, what the fuck is happening out here? Because there's been some missile strike. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Gee, what's that cloud out there?
Right, right. Um, so let's talk about the goddess community and how it plays into all of that. Um, Recently, I've had a lot of discussions about, again, I think it's changing, this move forward and coming together. Because for me, my own personal spiritual beliefs, I really do believe that we're all one. And I think that globally, consciousness is moving in that direction.
Mhm.
So, but it seems like women, so two things are kind of happening simultaneously from where I sit. One is I applaud more and more women who are trying to have what they are most passionate about be their source of income. Fabulous. But the other side of that is, because we're all doing that, we're too busy to collaborate with others.
Or don't have enough money to participate with others.
Right. I mean, I know I'm in that boat, right? Like,
Yeah.
none of my projects are monetized, and people tell me to go to this goddess conference in California, and I'm like, if you're buying my plane ticket, that's great. Otherwise, that's not an option for me,
Right.
you know? So how do we overcome that? Because I feel like some of what I see these women doing is just perpetuating the problem that we already have, which is, yes, they're doing what they love, but they're still drawn into the got to make money, got to take care of my family, got to have security, got to have 401k, got to, you know
Right.
what I mean? The end goal is still the same.
Yeah.
So that doesn't, I don't feel like that's serving them. I mean, other than, yes, it's good for your soul to do what you love for a living, but I don't know. There's still like, there's some part of me that's like, yeah, but aren't you just doing what we've been doing all this
Well,
time?
Kelly, I don't know if this is a good answer, but it's my only answer. First of all, universal basic income would solve that. Okay.
Agreed.
And it would also help, people who are trying to go to college. But anyway, so put that aside because that's not going to happen soon. Um, the only way I was able to accomplish everything I've done, write books, lead sacred tours, do a podcast, was I worked a full-time job and I hated it. And I didn't even like the person that I had to be. Often I was, to keep that job, I had to be someone that acted and spoke counter to my
Right.
goddess belief. So I had to really compartmentalize, you know.
Right.
And I don't think there is a good answer right now because yeah, there are women who are well off and there are an awful lot of women who aren't. I mean, I think about the docu-film that I was in, Femme, Women Healing the
Mhm.
World. Emmanuel Atier was, I think, financed in part by Sharon Stone, who helped him.
Right.
He ended up going bankrupt over that film. He could
Mm.
not even get women to download it for $5.
Mm.
So there's something about women not supporting women as well,
Right.
and it could be because they don't have the extra money, or it could be there is just something in us. We have not learned to really be a sisterhood yet.
Right. Well, that's part of those societal ills that we were talking about, right? Women have
Yeah,
been raised for many years now to compete with other women for men, for money, for whatever. And women distrust other women. I can't tell you how many women have come into my life and at the beginning of whatever spiritual path they were on, hated other women, didn't trust other women. I mean, this is also outside of the goddess community. I think we're a little
yeah,
better at that.
yeah.
And outside of a lesbian community, because I think we're better at that. Um, but yeah, there's just that kind of ingrained
Yeah,
whatever. If I could make any improvements on the Barbie movie, which I loved
me
and
too. I loved
think
it.
and think should be required viewing for every man over the age of, I don't know, 12. um, or maybe they can come out with a part two that highlights that, right? Like, this
Yeah,
is another part of the patriarchal problem because we compete with one another. And
yeah,
like I said, I don't think that's nearly as much of an issue in goddess circles as it is outside of them. I think
yeah.
that we have a hold of some knowledge that serves us, but
Well, and I wonder too, we have been okay, I hope this doesn't sound like hyperbole. I hope you kind of get where I'm going. We have been so oppressed by patriarchy for so long. I think women have really lost hope that things can change and it's ever going to be any different. you know?
Right.
And I mean, we have to make it different, but I think one of the elephants in the living room is not just women's inhumanity to women, but women who don't teach their sons better,
Right.
and women who prop up all of these powerful men or organizations that are against their interests, to
Right.
be close to power, to I don't know, have a paycheck, like I did myself, to have a paycheck, you
Right.
know. So it's not easy. I don't think we all can have the luxury of trying to work the job we're passionate about, because it might not pay the bills. I mean, for instance, would it have been better for me to try to go get a job as a writer or a journalist and be starving, and have prevented myself from doing the goddess work I did? That horrible job enabled me to do what I did, you know?
Right. Right.
So it's I guess, obviously it's kind of a sacrifice. I'm a practical Virgo. So
Right.
I mean, that's kind of where I go, I don't know. I wish I had a better answer.
So, goddess culture on the rise.
Yes and no. I mean, when I look
I'm
at
trying to give
Karen,
you some hope. I listened to one of your episodes yesterday. I can't remember which one it was. Something about, I think it was about manifestation, and you were like, "Well, I'm kind of losing hope," and I was like, "Oh, we have to give Karen some hope. We have to give Karen some hope."
well,
That
you know what
people,
gave me
that
hope?
people like me and my generation, we really are stepping up to the plate. I know two other women who have goddess spirituality podcasts, and we're
Yeah,
all around the same age. So
yeah.
we're trying to glean. That's why we have you guys on our shows, because we're trying to glean all of this information.
Well, here it's always yes and no, because when I was pretty isolated during the time I was trying to care for my husband with his brain injury and recover from my own stun gun assault and write the book. I really sort of dropped off social media for several years. And I put the podcast on hiatus. And when I came back and I really started paying attention to Karen McRandall's Divine Feminine app,
Mm-hmm.
I was gobsmacked at
Mm-hmm.
all of the activity going on out there and all of the different flavors. And I was like, yes, yes. And here, women and goddess had a place at the parliament again, and that was all beautiful, because I had heard, I mean, the last time I talked at the parliament was when it was in Utah, and I think that was 2015, and that was before. I didn't go on hiatus till probably 2019. I had heard that um, we should enjoy that, because women in goddess were not going to be able to be so center stage moving forward.
Mm.
So I was, when I disappeared, it felt like things were not on the upswing. But when I
Right.
came out of my forced isolation, I did feel so much better. That didn't mean all the problems weren't still there, but it
Right.
felt like the idea of goddess and the feminine had, was starting to really catch on like wildfire. But I'm not sure, women everywhere have a full picture of it yet,
Right.
but they're getting on board, and I think more of them are thinking about themselves and self-care, and they're starting to value themselves more and don't want to just accept what the church or men or the economy, that box. We're not just breeders.
Right.
We're not going to let you not pay us equal pay. Yes, we're entitled to have childcare credits, yada, yada, yada. Oh, and there's more. we haven't really increased the number of women in government, but at least in Washington, but there are more women governors. And there are many more women in college than men. So, and people are leaving the organized religion, and they're more spiritual than religious. So there are signs out there, but we still have a lot of work to do,
We do. I've said for many years now that I believe that it is inevitable that we return to a matrilineal, matrifocal, divinely feminine focused world, because everything is cyclical, and we know that it was that way, and it will therefore be that way again, right? I mean, that's one of the things that I try and focus on to give me hope when I see the horrors of the world, that like everything is in divine order.
Yeah.
Right. Like this is the chaos before the change, right?
I do believe that. And I mean, I think more hope is astrologically, all the astrologers tell me that, the arc of progress is gonna, like they say, bend toward progressiveness. Whether we're gonna see it in our lifetime in a big way, I don't know. We might not. I don't know. But we have to plant the seeds. Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a lot to be said. And I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say something else. Maybe it'll come back.
Right. So one of the things that I've noticed is, and particularly because we live in an online world, right? And everything's about presentation, and not to say that there aren't people who are authentic, of course there are. But with such a focus on how we are being perceived, I feel like the actual spiritual part of goddess spirituality sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. And I don't hear, in my opinion, I don't hear enough people talking about, what is your practice? Are you praying? Are you meditating? Are you making offerings? Are you doing ritual? What are you doing because the goddess isn't just some default, right? Having a relationship with her takes time, and it's a relationship that needs to be paid attention to and nurtured, just like any other relationship. I tell the people that I work with, I'm like, if you were dating somebody, how would you get to know that person? You'd spend time together, you'd talk a lot, you'd listen a lot.
Yeah.
And you would make that person a priority. And the same is true of the goddess, right? Like my relationship with the goddess is the singularly most important aspect of my life, even above my marriage. And I have a happy marriage, and I love my wife, not as much as I love the goddess. And she knows that, and she's kind of
okay with it.
Yeah, kind of.
So let me address that, but I remembered what I was about to say before, because you talked about matriarchies. I think there's so many women that don't even know that there were matriarchies. So that's number one. Education is so key. I mean, since I've moved to Southern Oregon now from California, I am finding women that didn't know Carol Christ, don't know anything about Pandora's myth, don't know anything about matriarchy. We have a lot of work to do to let women know there is something other than what we are living in today. It used to be different. It can be different again. That's number one. Number two, I also think that all of this goddess ideals and values, it's a mindset more than it's a gender thing, because I'm not one of these believers that it's just going to be women that's going to save the world, because of like the women Phyllis Chesler writes about in her book, Women's Inhumanity to Women, like the women we mentioned earlier who were busy propping up patriarchy and fundamentalist religion and predator capitalism. So I think it's going to take good men, feminist men, if you want to call them that. I don't care what we call them, Men who know what we know and believe what we believe because they're out there, along with women. It's not just a woman thing and an anti-man thing.
Right.
That I really do feel like I want to stress because, I've been married to the same guy for 40 years, and he's been the wind beneath my wings since the 90s. If, he was there supporting me in everything I did. And I've run into a lot of men like that.
Mhm.
So, they're there, and I think they can be cultivated when they're educated. And, a lot of it depends, like I said, on what women are teaching their sons. But anyway, practice. Yes, I am fond of saying Goddess is not an ATM machine. You don't
Right.
just go to her to withdraw, withdraw, withdraw.
Right.
I need a lover. I need money. I need a job. I need.
Right. Then you're just making the goddess your errand girl.
Yeah, yeah. And it is about reciprocity, like everything in life is, And I think it's a very personal thing. Some people might stay connected with Goddess by following the wheel of the year or the moon phases, or I have a living room that's an Egyptian temple, and Isis has a prominent spot on a big table, and she is a focal point. I see her every day. I can't not think about her.
Right.
And I'm constantly writing about her and talking about her. And I think about, there was a movie that came out a few decades ago, I think maybe. It was a King Arthur movie, and the Lady of the Lake was telling Arthur that she was dying because no one remembered her.
Right.
And I feel like it's really our job to um, stay connected to our goddesses, whichever one, we feel called to, and, incorporate her into our lives. So it's not just like when I was a Catholic, well, we just went to church on Sunday. And once that hour was over, we didn't think about church anymore,
Right.
I think whether we're talking about her as a deity, an archetype, or an ideal, she has to be incorporated into our lives. And I think it's important to talk about her as an archetype and ideal for the agnostics and the atheists out there,
Right.
to understand who she is, even if they don't want to believe she's in the heavens and they can pray to her and she cares about us.
Agreed.
And I'm also starting I feel like, take my practice and my thoughts and this spiritual journey that I'm on to the next level, because I don't know, somehow all of a sudden now, I didn't used to pay attention to it. I used to poo-poo it as new agey gobbledygook, but I'm thinking more about frequency and vibration and ascension. And I'm really starting to see, for us to vibrate at a higher level, we have to be living those goddess ideals. And it's like now I feel like those two things are married in my mind:
Right.
goddess values, ascension. And maybe somebody's going to call it ascension, somebody else is going to call it how we evolve humanity.
Right. Right.
But I'm really starting to look at that seriously. It makes sense to me, where when people used to say, "Oh, Karen, you're a light bringer," I go, "Okay,"
Yeah.
you know.
Right. Right.
But now I redefine life bringer maybe as a teacher. And
Right.
and
Right.
I'll go, "Okay, well, if you call me a teacher, yeah, I can accept that." And so now I've expanded light bringer to mean teacher, and I'll claim that title now.
Right. Well, and I think we do. I, I mean, sometimes we struggle with, some women have no problem with it at all. But I know for myself, like, I really struggle to embrace the title of priestess,
Mm,
because I am not somebody who took one of the 1,000 come to our goddess school classes online to be ordained in some particular lineage. Although I had looked into that, but that is not, again, something that I can afford.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have gone to, become a priestess of Avalon or the 13 Moons tradition, which is probably one of the most reputable ones out there. But I just couldn't. Like, that wasn't possible for me. But then because and maybe you can relate to this and maybe you can't, but I feel like I'm often the I'm so smart person, but then somebody puts it a different way and I'm like, oh, like I'd never even considered that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. We teach
So
each
last
other.
season I had Flora Ware on the show, and Flora Ware, who's the founder of Earth Song Temple, and she runs a school such as what I was talking about. And she said to me, she said, well, Kelly, if you look at the history of the word priestess, all that really means is that you keep the fire burning in the temple for the goddess and you're of service to your community. And I was like, oh,
I'm a priestess.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I went and got ordained, which made me feel a little more official. But
Yeah. Yeah, but I know what you're talking about, because first of all, the mainstream world does not know goddess people, pagans, whatever we call ourselves. There's not a good word. They don't know we have clergy. And
right,
I can tell you, I ran into so many women who wanted to be ordained, but it was about, gee, it's the really cool clothes, and we're going to do magic. And they had no concept of service.
well, I ran into that in the witch community and the pagan community quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah,
And I mean, I'm sure that I met very ethical pagan practitioners as well.
sure,
But for every
absolutely.
one of them, I met 10 who were in it for, I want to learn how to do magic so that I can make shit happen. And it's
Right.
like,
Or
yeah,
you'll go to say a pagan pride day, and they have a list of classes, and everybody flocks to the sex magic class, and
right,
nobody
right,
goes to the spirituality and ethics class.
right, right, right,
So I kind of feel like goddess spirituality has not matured yet. Maybe we're in our teenage phase, so to speak. Um, but I don't know. We all are where we are in our spiritual journey, and I think how far I've come since the 90s, and people just learn as they learn. But it is hard because it's not like there's a central place we can all go to for us to all even be on the same page. We're certainly not a monolith. I think about again, being a Catholic, all the different aspects of Christianity out there, and some
right,
people don't even think Catholics are Christians. So, in some ways, we're no different than the patriarchal religions in that sense, that we're all over the place. But I do believe that we have to give ourselves permission to claim that, if you want to call it a title, a label, whatever it is, especially if we're in service to the community. And that can mean a lot of different things, from being a hospice worker to a social justice activist to an author to an artist. How are you, bringing spirituality to your life, your family's life, your community? And there's lots and lots of ways to do that.
right. So I have this. So I founded this nonprofit, the Church of the Goddess, which really isn't a thing yet. But I spent a lot of time on the website and I kind of developed my own framework for, and I think this is the book that I need to write. I'm working on a book now about Ellen of the Ways and the history of deer, particularly reindeer mythology. But I really need to write this book called Shiism, A New Theology, because part of what I wrote about was, if that's a term that people can embrace, I'm a Shiist. That means you're following a goddess path. Doesn't matter what path it is. I mean, it's as broad as pagan is, because there's a lot of different kinds of pagans too, but they'll all answer to pagan, right? Druids will answer to pagan. Celtics will answer to pagan. So I coined this phrase Shiism, and it seemed like a good fit at the time.
Well,
But
I came
because
up
what
with
I
that.
envision is this kind of global sisterhood, right? Because
Right.
like Liz Kelly's book, Home to Her, and you were on Liz's podcast,
Yeah.
um, her book is all about, we have to remember that there are other countries, right, who have very long-standing traditions of different goddess paths. Like it's not just here. And even like I had somebody on the show last season who was in the Caribbean and all about Caribbean goddesses. And it's like there are so many other paths, and there are so many goddesses other than the Greco-Roman pantheon. You know what I mean?
Oh,
That's
absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
something
I
I try
look
and
at
educate.
Goddess as really, the poster girl for diversity by her
Right.
many faces across continents and cultures. And I like your idea of Shiism. When I wrote my first book, Sacred Places of Goddess, first of all, your listeners might find this funny. And I love this story that my male publisher did not want me to capitalize the word goddess. And I freaked out and said, I have to
I would have freaked
capitalize the
out.
word goddess. And so he finally agreed to put it to a vote to all of his publisher friends. And it was so funny because it came back along gender lines. The women all said capitalize it, the men all said lowercase. So
Shocking.
he gave in and he let me capitalize it. So in that book, I was trying to figure out what to call myself. Yes, I was a priestess, but I wanted the book to be a little bit more mainstream. Pagan, I know that bothered me because it's always been a derogatory term Christians thrust on
Right.
non-Christians. So I came up with goddess advocate. And I know that sounds so sterile. But I couldn't, but because I was also trying to incorporate, you know, uh, men like my wonderful husband who is dedicated to Isis and Sekhmet and Anubis, so it couldn't just be gender oriented like that. It had to
Right.
be inclusive of both
Right.
genders. So
Right.
Goddess Advocate was the best I came up with. And I wish someone would come up with something better.
Well, I like Shiism, and we'll see if that catches on
I think it
or not.
will.
I mean, I got to start talking about it and writing about it and all those things I haven't done yet, but it's not on the website. Um, yeah, because I really did want that. And, in last season, we had this episode about goddess churches and what that could look like,
Hmm.
to be an all-inclusive space. And I can't remember whose website it is, but somebody's website talks about men, and she calls them the shining brothers.
Hmm.
And that's a term that I can embrace because I have come across men. There's this guy that emailed me from the Church of the Goddess website, and his first question was, do you allow men? And you know what? I've had a long email correspondence with this guy now, and he is a dedicant
Yeah.
and frustrated because he
Yeah.
doesn't have other men in his life to talk to about the goddess, and the pushback that he receives when he does try.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel bad for the good men out there because where do they have to go?
Right,
And I really do think we have to find a way to embrace them at the well, so to speak. Um,
right, right.
and work in partnership with them because partnership, like Rianne Eisler writes about, partnership is what we're looking for,
Right, right.
Um, so yeah, we got to figure it out.
So let's go back to for just for a few minutes. I know that you wanted to talk about the sacred sites and sacred site pilgrimages, and I'm curious to talk about that again because of uh, the financial barrier to things like that. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
it's huge. Yeah, it's huge. Well, I will say that the only reason my husband and I were able to travel to all of these sacred sites back in the 90s and 2000s was because we were part-time travel agents.
Hmm.
So I was not paying what the general public was paying.
Right.
We also had a timeshare. So sometimes I was able to utilize the timeshare as a base and then just rent a car and go out on day trips. That's when
Hmm.
he and I traveled by ourselves before I actually started putting together group tours. But the cost is prohibitive. But I will say, at least now, virtually, we can visit the great museums and see
Right.
a lot of the goddess artifacts. Um, but it's the difference between reading a recipe or tasting the stew. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's something about standing in these sacred sites where goddess was worshipped. She was at the center of culture, that made it so much more real to me on some level,
Right. Right.
you know? And that's why in my Sacred Places book, I actually tried to include as many places here in the United States as I could think of that we could look at as goddess sites.
Right.
First of all, I, took the leap and said, any museum that's got goddess artifacts in it is a sacred site as far as I'm concerned, because you have her image, her representation, her history. So let's call that a goddess site.
Except
Um,
when the museums do that thing that they do sometimes, which is label something as woman holding
yes,
gourd, blah, blah, blah. When you
yeah,
and I know that is very much a particular goddess that you're thinking.
yes, yes,
And,
or
and I
or
say
or you,
that and I say that coming from a background of libraries, museums, and archives. And
yeah.
yeah,
Well, the religious right here is a lot to contend with. And so there's that. Um, yeah, so or they'll fertility figure. That one gets me too.
right,
So
right.
yeah, so museums, the good, great museums. I mean, in California, there's the Rosicrucian Museum. Down at the end of a hall of goddess artifacts is a huge statue of Sekhmet. So yeah, museums, also a lot of places that we might not think about, like the Grand Canyon. I make the case in my book that we could look at the Grand Canyon as a sacred site of goddess. I've started to look at, rivers in the United States,
Hmm.
look at churches dedicated to like Mary Magdalene or Mary, or like in Los Angeles, there's a church. Outside of it is an area dedicated to Guadalupe. So, we have to, we might not have great archaeological sites, but we do have other flavors of sacred
Right.
places. And
We're gonna take a day trip to the Serpent Mound
oh,
in
yeah,
Ohio.
yeah. And if you're living on the West Coast, you can take my book and actually do a West Coast tour.
Yeah.
And I have stuff on the East Coast too, like the Statue of Liberty,
Mhm.
because there's precedent for that in Rome, because they looked at liberty as as a virtue that they deified. So it's not like
Right.
we made it up out of whole cloth. And
Right.
and she does represent values of goddess. So she's our political goddess, and she's on top of on top of Congress.
Right. Right. Interesting. Yeah, I wish there were more sites here, but I like what you said about trying to see some of these natural things differently. Like there's something else in Indiana. There's some underground river in Indiana that looks amazing. The descent's like 500 feet, so I'm not sure if I could walk that, but I'm sure going to try
Yeah.
because that sounds like an amazing thing. Um, and maybe someday as we move forward into this income equality or I come into contact with one of us who does happen to be wealthy and is willing to put me on a plane somewhere. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah,
would give anything to go to the Glastonbury Goddess Conference, but I don't see that in my financial future.
right.
You know what I
Not
mean?
yeah, well, not at the moment. Well, there another place that I think we ought to look at as a sacred site of Goddess is the Library of Congress.
Mm,
I was really sort of gobsmacked when I walked in there and saw all of everywhere you look or images of the feminine. Go online and look at
mhm.
it because you can do a virtual tour. They name, areas of science, agriculture, mathematics. I mean, all of these genres are all represented in the female form.
Right,
And I don't know, I feel like we got to take it and claim it where we see it,
right,
and not just you know, um, uh, give it more meaning, give ourselves permission to give it meaning.
right. Anything in our list that we didn't get to?
Not that I can think of,
Okay.
other than plugging my podcast and books. um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
I love your podcast. I mean, I look at, I go far back and I look and see some of these women that you've had on, and I think how lucky was she to get to talk to her.
I
But
feel that way too. Yeah.
but I'm having Max Dashu on the show this season, so I'm hoping that 2 decades from now, people are going to look through my archives and go, "Wow, she got to talk to Max Dashu."
There you
So,
go. Well, and some of
I
these
mean, it
women
is,
have
it's,
passed,
yeah,
and if
yeah.
we don't,
Like you had, who I love the most. I'm a big Jean Shinoda Bolen fan,
Mhm.
and you had talked to her, and I was like, oh, she got to talk to her.
Yeah, yeah, but she's still alive,
Yes,
um,
yes, and
but
still doing her thing,
yeah,
right?
and
I
but
I
there's
see classes and videos and stuff come out of her all the time. I think she's fucking fabulous.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. You might, I don't know if she's given interviews anymore, but Elizabeth Baring,
Hmm, hmm.
she's incredible. Get her while you maybe still can.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Carol Christ is gone, Lydia Rule is gone. So many of them are gone now, but at least their voices live on. You know,
And those of us that have these podcasts, like I said, it's funny because many of you have been on all three of our podcasts. Because there's myself and Liz Kelly's home to her podcast, and Dr. Carla Ionescu's The Goddess Project podcast, and like Glennis Livingstone has been on all three of our shows.
yeah,
You've been on two out of three.
yeah.
So
I
we
don't know
try
the
and
other.
find these people, and I'm looking at, these are the women, including yourself, that I consider the foremothers of this goddess spirituality. And I feel that way about everybody that's coming on the show this season. I'm Marilyn Nyborg and Max Dashu um and Dale Allen, even though she's a little bit younger. But yeah, these are the people that have been doing this work, and we love talking to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it feels y- I can remember in the 90s when I was so petrified, I couldn't even find my voice to call in a corner, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so to
Right,
be here now, who'd have thunk it? You know what I mean? Um,
right.
but yeah, so thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
and particularly my generation. So I'm 51. So I'm at that, Generation Z is kind of the crux between we've been here for this explosion of technology and so much information is available to us, but I'm also old enough to remember that when I wanted to learn about a goddess or witchcraft or whatever, I had to go to the library. And I learned from other people and elders who weren't on a screen.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
And you could
so
feel the
and I
energy. You'd feel
right.
the
And
energy in the room. Yeah,
so I see these women that are in their 80s doing podcast episodes, and I'm like, that is something. Like that just makes my heart happy.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Because
yeah.
they because you all want to share your knowledge with us before it's gone,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, because I don't want us to have to keep reinventing the wheel,
Right, right,
because we just waste time and that only serves patriarchy,
right, right.
Yeah, so for me it's never been about the money, it's always been about the knowledge because I grew up in the Bible Belt and I didn't start learning any of this till I was 30, and
Right.
I was pretty angry honestly for a few years that I didn't have access to any of this. I didn't even know to
Mhm.
look for it.
Right.
I will say, and if you've read any of my writings about this, I grew up a racist and a white supremacist
Yep.
because that's what, was in my orbit. And you don't know what you don't know, you know?
Right, right. You certainly don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And there's always like I never stop learning. I'm in a class right now with Devora Gren,
Oh,
who I also consider one of our foremothers, right?
she
She's
was
been on
on
the show a
my
couple
show
times.
last week.
Yeah, yeah. I love her. So I'm in a class that she's teaching through the online Hebrew college. Um, Pretty much the theme of the book that she put out, Talking to Goddess, where she's got these 72 different women from various cultures and various goddess paths, and how do we communicate with the divine. And every class, she says something that I think, how did I not know that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How is this the first time I'm hearing about whatever it is? But so yeah, I think those of us that are doing this work who are of my generation, we're still very eager to learn and very eager to share it because we are at that crux and we have the technology to spread that message to perhaps a different, you know what I mean? Like the people
Yeah,
who listen to your podcast might not be the same people that listen to my podcast and vice
absolutely.
versa. Because that's the thing about podcast analytics, right? You can see the numbers, but you really don't know who's listening.
No, no, no. Yeah.
Unless they
Well,
send you a message, which is rare because nobody communicate, engagement is very difficult on social media.
absolutely, absolutely. Well,
Um,
I just want to say, before we go, because I know our time's almost up, I have to credit Rihanna Eisler. She really was one of my major mentors.
mhm,
And I think it was because of her work I started to also make the pivot over to social justice. And it was because of Chalice and the Blade. Everybody needs to read the Chalice and the Blade. You
yeah, yeah.
if we had a one book that we all read, I don't know, I think I would want it to be that book so that we could
Okay.
at least all start on that same page.
So before I let you go, at the end of the episode, I ask all the guests who haven't been on the show before the same three questions. Question one, tell me something about yourself that people who know you would be surprised to learn.
Okay.
Some quirky thing or some
Okay, I know what
secret
it is.
pleasure or okay.
When we were in Israel, a guy came up to my husband and offered him 50 camels for me. But what was funny? I thought my first thought was that a sale price or a really good price?
Right. Was it good? Is 50 good? That's what I would have asked. Is that good? Okay. Okay. Uh current current favorite TV series or movie?
Oh, um, I really loved Barbie.
Me too, man.
But you know what? I every year I watch the first Avatar, because for me it was like Goddess Church.
Yeah,
And I love The Handmaid's Tale,
me
the
too.
series.
Let
Yeah.
it serve as a warning, right?
Yes. Yes, 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 yes.
And final question, if your life were a movie, what would be the theme song on the soundtrack?
Oh, geez, that is a hard one. Um, she did it her way.
Is that a song?
Well, I was thinking, isn't there a song out there? I did it my way. I think
Yeah.
That's an old song.
The Frank Sinatra song.
I think so.
But yeah, that works.
Yeah,
That
maybe
works.
so. Well, and then I'm thinking about, I mean, I was a kid when these things came out. I don't know why I'm thinking about these now, but Nancy Sinatra had that song, "These Boots Are Made for Walking."
Yeah.
And I think about all the things I walked away from in life to get to where I am today. You know, Louisiana, Catholicism, my family, racism, all of those things. I had to put my boots on and walk and, take an exit to make a different choice for myself in life.
I think it should be that because that
That,
seems more fitting, and it's a woman.
yeah, there you go.
So, all right, Karen. Well, I'm going to do that thing that Zoom does and say goodbye, and the screen's going to go blank and all of that. But I will be in touch. I'm sure that I will see you maybe on the weekly Weavers call. That's been a great thing. Hopefully, you can come to that sometime.
Yeah.
But now we seem to be running in similar circles, so I'm sure that I'll see you soon. But until then, may the love and the peace of the goddess be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. And, back at you as well. Ditto.
All right. I will
All right.
speak with you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching or listening to The Girlfriend God. Don't forget to like, rate, review, subscribe, follow, and comment. Episodes drop every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and you can follow The Girlfriend God on social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.